synagogue if you don't pass the test. After reading through a list of 10 generations following Noah, the Torah introduces us to Abraham, whom God tells us, I should say, tells him to leave his place of birth and go to an unknown land that God will show him. And from there, he will become a father of a great nation. He'll become a blessing, the recipient of God's covenant. And we now know he will be the first Jew. But why did God choose Abraham? What was so good about Abraham that God chose him? And why did God change his name from Abram to Abraham? And the Torah it never actually tells us what Abraham did that made him so worthy. At least with Moses, for example, we know the story. He killed an Egyptian taskmaster. He watered Jethro's daughter's flock. And what did Abraham do? It doesn't appear that he did too much. There are various midrashim that try to fill in the gaps of his early life in order to answer this question. There's a very famous story about supposedly Abraham's father was an idol worshiper and a purveyor of idols, and one day he left Abraham in charge of the store while he went to the marketplace, and Abraham smashed all the idols except for the large one. He put the stick in the large one's hand, and when the father came home and saw all the idols smashed, he said to him, "What happened?" And he said, "Dad, I really don't know." He said, the large one there, the large guy got so angry with the others that he smashed them. And his father said to him, "They're idols. They're inanimate objects. What are you talking about?" So the Midrash brings us this story, gives us sort of a snippet into his early life to explain to us how Abraham came to understand that idol worship was foolish and instead came to believe in the one true God. But was forswearing idolatry and believing in God really enough to make Abraham the father of a great nation, and the one through whom all nations will be blessed? Think about it. You've got Judaism, you've got Christianity, you've got Islam, that all look at Abraham as their prophet. The answer, of course, is no. That wasn't the only reason. The real reason that God chose Abraham, because Abraham didn't just keep his newfound belief to himself, he took action. Yes, he smashed the idols. He even confronted his own father about this ridiculous belief in inanimate objects as a god. Abraham then went about convincing others that idolatry was wrong, and that there is only one God. And it is that belief in standing up for what we believe to be true and not being afraid of teaching ethical monotheism to others that had been the hallmark of the Jewish people ever since. Despite how others, as we clearly see today among Hamas, Yimach Shimon, Hezbollah and its supporters, despise us for that. And that is why God made an eternal covenant with Abraham and all the descendants and changed his name from Abram to Abraham. But why did God need to change his name? His name sounds okay to me, Abram. Now again, here you might remember this from Hebrew school. And some of you here go to Shechter, right? Is that right? No, Shechter. What's that? Akiva! Okay, I'm sorry. Just promoted the wrong school here, okay? I was going to say it was a good school, Shechter, but I won't say that. Akiva! How many of you go to Akiva here? Ah, wow. Okay, so you're going to know this then, because you would have learned this. We, from going back from Hebrew school, were told that the reason that God changed Abram's name was because God wanted to put the Hey, the H there for Hashem, in recognition of Abraham's great faith and belief in him. And as a sign of now he's connected with God, God's promise that Abraham, would be a blessing and the father of multitudes. Avram. But I believe it's not quite accurate. I believe there is another story to it, another reason that God changed his name when he could have changed it to anything else. If we know the dialect of the time, He could have changed it to Abradam, would have worked. But he chose the hey, hum, changing Abram, which is Avram. It's two words, Avram, father of many. That's what Avram means, father Avram of many. But what did God change it to? He changed it to Avraham. That one H. What is Raham? Raham is Rachem. What does Rachem mean? It means compassion. Now God changed Abraham's name. He wasn't just the father of many, not just the father of the Jews, but Abraham was now the father of compassion. He was the first person in the Bible, in recorded history for that matter, to teach us this trait of rachamim, of mercy. It is Abraham who is the first person to teach us not only the belief in one God, but also the importance of rachamim, of compassion, of kindness, of chesed. Abraham teaches us that faith in God and belief in God is nothing without that God-like quality. And we say on Yontif, actually you sing it on Yontif in the choir there, you say Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, merciful and compassionate God. If God is merciful and compassionate, then we have to be. Maya, this is something that you have to learn from this moment on. That compassion, if you don't have it already, I believe you have it already, but you need to learn. Abraham understood this and he acted upon it. And that is why God changed Abraham's name specifically to Abraham. And how did Abraham live up to that new name? Abraham was a man who was deeply concerned with the comfort and the well-being of others. He put others first. His tent was always open to any and every wanderer. It was why he gave his nephew Lot the first choice of land, the prized choice of land to settle in. He called up armies to fight and rescue Lot when he was taken captive. It's also why, as we will read next week, that he leaves his sickbed and when he sees strangers in the distance to bring them into his tent to feed them. So if we examine Abraham's life, we see that he did not live by faith alone. He lived and he served God, and through his actions, he was compassionate to those who needed compassion. He argued and he fought even with God for social justice. And he fought with arms to defend himself and his family when they were threatened. And we as Jews today, we saw this just on Thursday night in Amsterdam. We saw what happens to Jews today. But nonetheless, we have to live up to Abraham's name and the covenant that God made with him. We must live up to his example. I want to give you an example of how we as Jews continue regardless of what's thrown at us on a daily basis. There was a woman recently in England. We're going to call her Sarah Levine. Not going to give you her real name. She passed away. She was relatively young. God had blessed her and her husband with great success. They were wealthy. They didn't spend their money on themselves. They gave tzedakah. They gave charity on a massive scale, within and beyond the Jewish community in Britain, in Israel, and elsewhere. And when she died, among those who felt most bereaved, it was not just her family, but it was the waiters and waitresses of a well-known hotel in Israel where they often stayed. She had come to know all of them, where they came from, what the family situations was, the difficulties that they were going through and the problems that they faced. She remembered not only their names, but also the names of their spouses and children. And whenever any of them needed help, she made sure that it came to them quietly and unobtrusively. It was a habit that she had wherever she went. And at her funeral, Sarah's husband told the story of how they met. And it turned out that Sarah's husband was actually quite a bit older than she was. He had been a friend of her parents. The story goes that she had had some weeks that were free one summer before starting school, university. And Mr. Levine gave her a job. And one evening after work, they were about to join her parents for a meal. And in the street, they passed a beggar. And Mr. Levine reached in his pocket and tossed a coin to the beggar. And as they were walking on, Sarah turned to him and said to him, "Would you lend me some money? I need some money." Fairly large sum. And she promised him that she would repay him at the end of the week when he pays her salary. So he did. He took the money out of his pocket and he gave it to her. And what did she do? She ran back to the beggar and she gave him the money. And he said to her, "Why did you do that? I already gave him money." And her answer was, "What you gave him was enough to help him for today, but not enough to make a difference in his life." And at the end of the week, Mr. Levine gave her salary, and she handed him back most of the money to repay him for the sum that he had lent her. And he said to her, "I will accept the money because I don't want to rob you of doing a mitzvah." But he said, "I also will accept it only if you agree to marry me, because your heart is much bigger than mine." And throughout their marriage, they were responsible for many of the most important educational, medical, and environmental projects in England and Israel. And yet they always had time to know the names of the children of the waiters of the hotels that they stayed in. My friends, that is one example of how we can live up to Abraham's trait of rachamim, of chesed, of kindness today. We don't have to be giving money. It's not about the money. It's about the kindness. There are plenty of other examples, as you can think of, I'm sure, where we individually and collectively as Jews live up to other traits in fighting for justice and fighting for our own defense as well. And that is why we are the descendants of Abraham, because we still embody the traits of compassion, justice, and strength, even when we are being attacked. For Abraham and for us today, faith alone, while important, is not enough. But rather it is faith in God combined with rachamim, with mercy and compassion towards man, which made Abraham the father of a great religion and us the inheritors and the keepers of that still very great religion. I repeat what I said earlier because of the lessons of Abraham. And because they ring true today as Israel continues its war in Gaza and in the north, as 105, I think now, innocent people are still held hostage. And as the vilest forms of anti-Semitism are springing up all around us, remember, Abraham lived and served God by and through his actions, as must we. Abraham was compassionate to those who needed compassion, as we must be. Abraham argued and fought, even with God, for social justice, as must we. Abraham fought with arms. He rose up to defend himself and his family when they were threatened, as must we. Today, we Jews, all Jews, must strive to live to Abraham's name and the covenant with God, with him, by living our lives like Abraham led his. And may we be blessed to live up to our calling as descendants of Abraham, always live by the values that he imparted to us. As God promised, all nations of the world will finally truly bless us. Shabbat Shalom.